sign?
Oh, sure.
Thank you. Look at me, I got lucky.
Welcome.
Let's see you in the house.
You take this around.
That works for you? Yeah, everything's good, I think. Yeah, I did it this week.
Morning, Phil.
Yeah, I was using my wings to pick it up.
Well, we've got a full house. Somebody's been selling tickets.
How are you?
Never felt better. Never had, oh, I love the rain.
Is it okay if I sit here?
Yeah,
I'm not so crazy.
that's the best seat in the house.
Okay. I didn't want to block you.
What were you saying?
Biology, right?
My God, Charles. No, it's kindergarten.
Yeah, kindergarten.
Oh, you like it or not?
Oh, he doesn't like it at all.
Oh, some dogs are crazy about it. Like snow, they love it.
Windows like that.
Even though it's raining. But we need it.
And the desks that go in. I think the sector.
The school. Hi, Penny.
Hello. I grab a stuff.
Nice to meet you. You're calling over your winery and then one week. And you'll talk about it, yeah?
Good morning, everybody. Welcome.
Morning.
I just wanted to say a few words in introduction. Many of you know Hal and have known him for years, but I bet you don't know everything about Hal. Not that this is everything about Hal. But I'm Catherine Dunst with the REACH team here at First Lutheran of Venice. REACH stands for Racial Equality and Connecting Hands. We are sponsoring Hal's talk today in honor of Native American Heritage Month, which is the entire month of November. We're just getting it in. I take great pleasure in introducing Hal, a longtime member of First Lutheran, who is treasured and respected here. Just a little bit of background, he's obviously going to go into a lot more. Hal and his family moved to LA in 1943 when he was 12. When he was 13, Hal and his family started attending First Lutheran. In 1945,
Wow.
Hal was confirmed in the first junior confirmation class in 1946. And by the way, not to leave someone else who's very important here, our videographer this morning, Rudy Olson, was the first person to be baptized in FLB. So
Wow.
And through the years, Hal has served in a wide variety of roles. I think he's probably touched almost everything we do here. Most importantly, to start, he was shortstop on our church softball team. Financial secretary, succeeded his father. Sunday school teacher. President, also vice president of the church council. Marriage encounter study along with his wife Marilyn. And they're celebrating their anniversary today. How many years?
Wow.
70 years. A lot to celebrate today. He's been elder numerous times, choir and song leader. He's been involved in mission, fellowship, and stewardship, numerous call committees. And last but not least, he's obviously a member of REACH. Hal has also had 9 letters to the editor published in the LA Times since 2019.
Wow.
All on topics related to Native Americans.
Doctrine discovery.
Specific to the Doctrine of Discovery, okay. And then just lastly, when describing Hal to friends and family outside First Lutheran, I say very fondly, you know, he's kind of like that advertisement. When E.F. Hutton speaks, people listen. Well, we have the good fortune of being able to listen to Hal now tell more about his story and some topics that are on his heart as a Native American. So I'll turn it over. There will be a Q&A session after his talk.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. It's so
Morning.
happy to be here. Thanks for coming, everyone. Appreciate it very much. My name is Harold or Hal, but when I was growing up, my nickname was Sonny. So, in fact, I have some pictures here later afterwards you can look, and I used the word Sonny in there. I thought of it to let you know that that was my name when I was little. First, out of respect, I would like to acknowledge and honor and thank the Keech people, the original inhabitants of and stewards of this land that we're on. For centuries, they raised their families, farmed, hunted, gathered, fished, and buried their ancestors here. The Keech are often referred to as Kangba or the Gabrielino people, but those are names that the settlers gave them. The Keech is what they call themselves, so that's the name I use. I am Seneca and Apache and a member of my mother's White Mountain Apache tribe in Arizona. My grandmother was Apache. My grandfather was of unknown ancestry. His legal census name was Navajo Bill. He had been captured from the Navajo tribe and became a respected member of the Apache tribe. He married an Apache wife, and he served as an Indian scout for General Crook in Fort Apache. Now I would like to comment on the Apache Indian scouts. Some think of them as traitors to their people. I don't think so, and here's why. The White Mountain Apaches recognize the futility of resisting and wanting to live in peace. The problem was that some renegade Apaches were still resisting and raiding the ranches, and consequently the rancher vigilantes retaliated and killed any Indians they could find, including those who wanted peace. The Army, using their traditional tactics, were unable to track and subdue the renegade Apaches. General Crook realized that and recruited peace-seeking Apache scouts to track the renegades. And that was the solution, and over time he was successful. Navajo Bill was one of those scouts, my grandfather. Unfortunately, Navajo Bill died in 1905, shortly before my mother was born. My mom's mother lived until 1921. After the death of both of their families, my mother lived with her traditional Apache stepfamily in East Fork. She had reconciled her native spirituality with the Creator God of the Bible and was baptized. The Holy Spirit had opened her heart, and she became a faithful Christian believer by the Lutheran mission in White River. Missions are not always thought of favorably. I would like to tell you more about this very unusual mission. In 1892, the Lutheran Church in Wisconsin wanted to establish a mission with a tribe that had not yet been reached. The White Mountain Apache tribe was chosen, and a mission was established. Originally, 3 male Lutheran missionaries served there in succession. But all 3 left due to illness, loneliness, or reassignment. In 1910, a request was made for a volunteer to fill the Arizona vacancy on the condition that he be married. Edgar Ginther, a seminary graduate, eagerly volunteered. Nature and Indians had been his childhood fantasy, but he wasn't married. Edgar immediately proposed to his girlfriend, Minnie. With naive courage, she said yes, and they married and immediately left for Arizona. They arrived in East Fork early in January 1911. At that time, the Apaches were very suspicious of outsiders, having been victimized by Army miners, ranchers, and they suffered from the epidemics that the outsiders brought. So, being outsiders, earning trust and respect would be difficult. One of Edgar's assignments was to reopen the Lutheran Mission School, a task they managed to accomplish while at the same time conducting worship services and visiting Apaches on horseback at their remote camps. Edgar was careful to never condemn their native customs. This was important and what made his ministry unusual. He believed that his mission was to gently present Christ to the Apaches and let the Holy Spirit open the hearts of all who became believers. Within a couple of years, the Ginthers had won the confidence of most Apaches. One of the Ginthers' many Apache friends, one was an Apache widow. Her name was B3, her government ID number. Sadly, her infant daughter had recently died from an illness. The Ginthers had cared for her during her time of loss. Following that sad time, the Ginthers' first child was born. Minnie continued her teaching responsibilities in the school by bringing her baby girl to class with her in the cradle board. One day, her friend B3 came in, took the baby to the Ginthers' house and cared for her, and then washed the dishes and cleaned the house. That became her daily, almost daily routine, and she became part of the Ginther household. They called her Shema, that's meaning my mother in Apache. She referred to the Ginthers as her children, and the Ginthers had 8 more children. Shema loved each one of them. She remained a true family friend and was with the Ginthers for 20 years until her death. Another great friendship with the Ginthers was with Chief Alchesay. When the Ginthers first arrived, they heard conflicting opinions about the chief. Pastor Ginther had little contact with him until the winter of 1918, the time of a deadly flu epidemic. Fearfully, the Apaches fled to the hills to escape the flu. Pastor Ginther, knowing he would be exposed to the flu, moved alone to White River and aided the agency doctor caring for the sick Apaches. For months, he and the doctor would search on horseback for Apaches to treat. One day, Pastor Ginther went out alone. He searched, and in a remote canyon, he spotted some smoke. It was Chief Alchesay's camp. The chief was sick with the flu, the killer flu, and had gone there to die. Pastor Ginther faithfully treated the chief, and over time, the chief recovered. That was the beginning of a lasting friendship. In 1922, the work on the new church in White River was completed and celebrated with a dedication service, during which the first person baptized was his friend Chief Alchesay, and along with 101 other Apaches. In the years that followed, Chief Alchesay visited the Ginthers frequently. He was fond of the Ginther children. When Minnie gave birth to their 6th child, Alchesay insisted that the baby boy be his namesake. They concurred and named him Arthur Alchesay Ginther. Thereafter, Pastor and the chief became brothers until the chief's death. After the devastating flu epidemic, Ginther had moved his family from East Fork to White River, where he had started a new mission. Edgar preached at the White River Indian Boarding School, taught Bible classes, made camp calls. By then, he had become fluent in speaking Apache. On her camp calls, Minnie would set up her portable organ, which she pumped with her feet while she played. They sang hymns, a crowd gathered, and there was a sermon and prayer. They bade farewell and went on to the next camp. That was their routine. Minnie and Edgar authentically demonstrated Jesus' unconditional love for the Apache people until the day that they died. Their son Arthur Alchese became ordained and continued his father's ministry, and the ministry continues to this day as their legacy. Back to my story. I believe that my mom's faith prepared her for what was to come later in her life. Following government policy, my mother was separated from her stepfamily and sent to Sherman Indian Boarding School in Riverside, California. Now, a little about my father. He was full-blooded Seneca from New York. Tragically, his single-parent mother had died when he was 4 years old, and he was placed in Thomas Indian School. Like all government boarding schools, they denigrated Native American culture. Students were forced to abandon their native identities and customs. He was there for 14 years. I know very little about his experience there, and I regret not having asked him more questions. We were not very close as I grew up. That may be because in the orphanage, he had no father figure in his life. When he graduated from high school in 1928, he and members of his Indian singing quartet headed for the West Coast by auto. Now back to my mom. Sherman, like Thomas, were schools federally established to assimilate students. Children were separated from their parents, given uniforms, haircuts, and were forbidden to speak their native tongue. Their official purpose was to kill the Indian, save the student. Sherman's emphasis, in addition to academics, was vocational. At Sherman, my mother, along with her other duties, had economics training. The school arranged for students to work during the summer for white families in Los Angeles. She established a lasting personal relationship with one particular employer, a caring family that hosted young Indians living in Los Angeles with gatherings in their home. I believe that was where my father and mother met. After my mother's graduation in 1928, their friendship developed into romance, and they were married. They made the decision to move to White River. That's where I was born in 1931. When I was baptized, I was blessed to have Minnie Genter as my godmother. My father worked for a trading post in White River. On his vacations, most every year, we would come to Venice and stay with my mother's employer family from her boarding school years. We loved staying in her beach home here in Venice, but we were always glad to come home to Arizona. We lived on the reservation for 12 years. During that time, my mother informed us that someday we would leave the reservation. I hated that idea because I loved our life there. It was home to me. We lived by the river. When not in school, I could roam the riverbank with my friends. If I spotted a promising fishing spot, I always was prepared with a fish line in my pocket. If the fish weren't biting, we could go swimming or hiking in the mountains. There were cornfields, so if we were hungry, we roasted corn on a fire. Or there were apples, peaches, or sugar cane to pick. Grapes and strawberries grew wild, none of which the city could offer. I believe that from my mom's boarding school experience, she determined that as adults, there would be more opportunities off the reservation than living on it. Communities that surround Indian reservations generally have a low opinion of Indians. They judge all Indians by the bad behavior of a few. My mother often cautioned me. She said, "Don't do anything that would cause anyone to say, 'Well, what do you expect? He's just an Indian.'" She prepared us to leave in two ways. First, by not teaching us the Apache language. That meant that I was cut off from learning about Apache culture and their traditions. nor could I fully interact with my Apache relatives and friends. My attempts to learn the language on my own failed because I struggled making the unique sounds of the Apache tongue. The second way, she made certain that we attended the small public school intended for the white BIA employees' children. My sister and I were the only Apache students. When World War II was declared, we packed up and left. When World War II was declared, my father needed to find defense-related work, and that became the reason to leave the reservation, as my mom had attended all along. So in February of 1943, we packed up and left, moving from our small town to the big city. It was overwhelming. Backwards here. Adding to that, wartime conditions were in place, including gas and food rationing, barrage balloons everywhere, anti-aircraft emplacements, searchlights, air raid alerts, and wardens, and blackouts. We had definitely experienced culture shock, but we managed to fit in as best we could. At Venice High School, I was the only Native American. There were a handful of African Americans and Latinos, but most of the student body was white. Our new life was very different. When there were difficulties, I believed that if we could only go back to Arizona, everything would be okay again. We were attending the Methodist church when, to our pleasant surprise, we learned of a newly formed Lutheran church here in Venice. Without hesitation, we attended. Our family was warmly welcomed by the members and Pastor Smith. Here, without a doubt, we felt loved and accepted. I have been asked if I ever experienced racism. My answer is yes, but not by being an Indian. It was when the Japanese returned from the internment camps after World War II. Americans who had lost loved ones in the war were understandably hostile to the returning Japanese. I was often mistaken for one, and sometimes a recipient of their hostility. It hurt because I was a true blue patriot during the war. I learned to be oblivious to the hostility and not to react. In high school, I had decided I wanted to become a commercial artist. So after graduation, I enrolled in Santa Monica City College. There, I admired a beautiful drum majorette from afar. Later, we were introduced, and to my amazement and to others, we became a couple. Marilyn was the answer to my prayer for someone to love and who would love me in return. We became inseparable. In 1950, the Korean War had begun, and I had enlisted in the Air Force Reserve that they recruited on campus. Upon graduation, my unit was activated, and soon after I received orders to go overseas to Korea. We had decided that if I were to go overseas, we would get married before I left. So on November 24th, 1951, exactly 73 years ago today, we were married, and several days later, off I went. Of course, leaving my new bride was devastating. Upon my release from active duty in 1952, I began my career in commercial art. And in 1964, I opened my own graphic design studio and served numerous clients for 40 years until my retirement. During this time, I didn't think much about my about being a Native person, although I was always proud of my Native American heritage. I was too busy trying to be a husband and a parent, becoming active in church, and furthering my career. In my education, to college and throughout most of my life, I didn't question the taught history of our nation's founding. I now have learned how biased and woefully incomplete it was. It is a sanitized history that completely overlooks many dark, shameful historic narratives. So what led to my important breakthrough? In 2018, my daughter-in-law Yvonne in Central California called to suggest that our family meet at a service honoring indigenous cultures at Cal Lutheran University in Thousand Oaks. Great, I thought, seeing it as a chance for a pleasant family gathering. I had no idea what was in store. An edifying sermon that day really opened my eyes. It was about some disturbing details concerning discovery, colonization, and our nation's founding. I was motivated to look deeper. While searching, I found information about the doctrine of discovery. It seemed important. Why hadn't it been in our history books? The more I learned, the worse it got. I began to understand why the doctrine of discovery was excluded from the history books. The doctrine was based on a principle in public international law that presumed the superiority of European Christians. My experience is that when people do learn about the doctrine of discovery, they don't want to talk about it. The doctrine originated from a series of papal edicts called bulls in the 15th century. The bulls gave European explorers theological and legal justification for the colonization of indigenous occupied lands, including forcibly taking the lands, enslaving, and eliminating the indigenous population if they resisted. Sadly, the popes wrote those bills on the pretext of spreading the gospel. In fact, they were antithetical to all that Jesus taught. In practice, it was more about gaining wealth and power than spreading the gospel. Our nation was founded on the doctrine of discovery's dehumanizing principles. We the people in the preamble of the Constitution is misleading. Later in that document, excluded from the people are merciless savage, that's the Indians, African Americans, they are only 3/5 human, and women who are not mentioned at all. So who's left? Only Christian landowning men. I invite you to watch Mark Charles' TED Talk, We the People, a 17-minute talk on YouTube. Those papal edicts were written over 600 years ago. 600 years ago. Some ask, aren't they outdated? The answer is no. As international law, the Supreme Court has cited the doctrine of discovery as legal precedent in settling landowner issues as recently as 2005 in the city of Sherrill, New York versus the Oneida Indian Nation case. For an overview of our nation's systemic racism, you can watch Phil Vischer's Race in America on YouTube. I believe that patriarchy, xenophobia, and misogyny that exists in our nation today can be traced directly back to the doctrine of discovery. As an indigenous follower of Jesus, I was deeply disturbed by this newfound knowledge because it impacted my people directly, but more broadly it affects all people of color. And furthermore, it is contrary to the teachings of Jesus. I asked myself, what should my response be? Do nothing and accept the status quo? As a Christian, maybe I should be forgiving. That would be an easy choice if there were confession and repentance by our nation, but that hasn't happened. But a Bible passage that guides me is in Paul's letter to the Ephesians. He writes, have nothing to do with the fruitless deeds of darkness, but rather expose them. That's what I've decided to do. My legacy, I hope, will be one of exposing the doctrine of discovery to as many people as possible, wherever and whenever I can. Ultimately, I believe that the doctrine of discovery should be repudiated by all followers of Jesus. And as a follower, I gladly serve on our REACH team, which, as Catherine reminded us, means racial equality and connecting hands. That's it. Thank you for listening. Does anybody have any questions? Any questions? Judy?
No,
Judy had asked if I could print out the talk. Well, this is sort of an earlier version of the talk. So Judy, this is for you. But I have some other extra copies if anybody's interesting, or if you want some, contact me. I can email them to you. Here are some, and here are some pictures of my time on the reservation and of the Gilters. You could pass those around and take a look at them. And then here's a list of books for further reading on Indigenous history.
Can you talk more about being on the reservations, your memories as a boy?
Yes. Oh, you want to take? Oh, thank you, Marilyn. That's my great-granddaughter. Paul, some more about my life on
The boy,
reservation
which you
as a
remember?
boy.
Yeah, which you remember.
As I said, I went to the public school, and that day when I went, first day of public school, I had a good friend who worked with my dad in the training post, and we lived close by, and so we went to school, and when I got there, they wanted to know my name. I said, it's Sonny Printup, and he had to correct me. He knew what my name was because he knew my dad from having been near him. But anyway, so I didn't know my own name. I had to, he had to tell what my name was. And then at that school, and they were mostly white, so I had their friends, and I had my Indian friends, and because I went to that school, I was sort of bullied by the Apache boys, because they saw me, and I lived in a house that they all lived in wickiups, in camps, and so we were different. We weren't accepted totally by my relatives. Well, my relatives did, but the others didn't necessarily, because we were obviously not living like they were. And they started a Boy Scout, Cub Scout troop. One of the teachers in the class in the school started a Cub Scout troop. So we went around and did scrap metal collecting for the war. And I loved the 4th of July celebrations, especially because it was a highlight of the year, because that's the one year they got the merry-go-round out and cranked up the old steam engine that drove it, and we had hot dogs and rodeos and baseball games and fireworks. That was the biggest thing, is we had fireworks. When we came to Venice, there are two things that I really loved. That was going to a soda fountain and having a vanilla soda. That was my favorite thing to have. And 5 and 10 cent stores. I would go in and spend hours of going up and down trying to decide what to buy. And as I said, I mentioned the other things. We were always out along the riverbank. We lived right close to the river, and the river would flood every once in a while, and so that was always exciting to watch all the things floating down. On Halloween, one Halloween, I contracted typhoid fever.
Oh,
And I did not recover until, I did recover, but I didn't recover until just before Christmas. And I remember during that time I was semi-conscious, and every once in a while I could remember something.
did you have access to medicine?
Hmm?
Did you have access to medicine?
Yes, there was a hospital there. I was in the hospital. And I remember one of the times I woke up and here was my step-grandfather. He was a medicine man. He had his drum and he was singing a song and
Wow.
a prayer for my healing. Go ahead.
I don't want to interrupt you.
That's okay.
I just wondered, which one are you in on the wagon here? Are you?
I'm the little one sitting on the wagon, the littlest one.
Oh, the little one. Okay, okay. I thought maybe you were, okay.
It's great that you have all these pictures back then.
Yeah, I had,
We'll bring them back.
my dad
Then they
worked
need
at,
to come this way after we,
After,
yeah.
It says gas 25 cents a gallon.
yes, yeah. And you could buy anything in that trading post, from gasoline to groceries, to boots, to hats, to saddles. You could even buy ice blocks. They had an ice making machine.
That's right.
And in fact, we didn't have electricity, so often I would sit around, we had a kerosene lamp that we lit our house with. And we had a wood burning furnace and a wood burning stove, of course, for cooking. But it was all modern technology at the time, because my relatives were cooking over a campfire.
So you have
Yeah.
fond memories. You have fond memories. from
Yes,
that.
yes, I do.
When your family discovered this church and you joined when you were around high school time,
I was 12 years old.
12 years old, is there anyone currently at this church that was there at the time you joined, or are you the
No, but Rudy's parents were there, and he's the first baptized person in the church congregation. And I was the first, I was in the first junior confirmation class at this congregation.
So you're the longest member at the church, this one?
I think so. Anything else?
I'd like to just point out one thing that I know is very dear to me, and I hope you continue it, is that I remember when I came into this church in March of 1985, and your parents were here. And I was happy to meet them. And what impresses me the most is that I have always, and I hope you continue it, I'm being selfish, I receive the most beautiful art Christmas cards from you. From the first one that you made for me. You're amazing, just amazing. And I love art, and you've put so much influence into it for me that it's helped me out in my art. And so I want to thank you so much.
Thank you. Well, we talked about, should I continue doing this? Because it's
Yes, I have all of mine too.
Every
single one of
Yeah,
them.
see?
How can we help you?
Well, anyway, I am, we wrote our message and we have a painting. So, yeah, you'll get it again.
Oh, good. I'm looking forward to it.
And if anybody else isn't on our list, let me know. And I'll send you one. Klaus?
I have a question about your legacy of trying to bring in more awareness of this discovery, documentation and all that, and heard for the first time that also other minorities are involved in that. And is there sort of a movement of you not being the only, so to speak, person being aware of it and wanting to make these changes? would you have a chance to gather sort of momentum with others on this very important topic?
That's very true, because it's not just the Indians.
That's what I'm saying.
It's anyone that isn't
Yeah.
a white Christian male is affected by it.
Right. So that's why, I mean, I only heard about the Pope, I think, going to Canada and doing some sort of a remission of sins and.
Yeah, he apologized, sort of.
Exactly. Right. So I mean, we need maybe something like that here in the US in some,
Yeah,
to
oh
some
yeah,
extent.
for sure.
And also bring a higher awareness of it, because as you said, everything is subdued, but I think there's more and more minorities being part of our country. I would think that.
Well, you bring up a good point, and Catherine reminded me of this, that in last October, I think it was, President Biden gave an official apology to the Gila Indian Reservation. And and he said, this is the first time it's been done. Well, it wasn't, because way back, I had heard about, I have a friend, Mark Charles, who wrote one of these books here, and he had learned about that apology. There was an apology that was made in 2009, I think it was, here. I'll read it. There was an important event, however, there's another presidential apology story. My friend Mark Charles, the co-author of the book Unsettling Truth, tells of a formal congressional apology to American Indians signed by President Obama that was passed in 2009. Mark Charles had been aware of that apology, so he did a search. He found it buried in House Resolution 3326, subsection 8113 of the Department of Defense Appropriations Act. It was on the 45th page of the 67-page bill. It was a vague 7-point apology, but nothing specific, ending with a disclaimer saying that it is not legally binding. But it was an apology. However, it had never been announced or publicized or read by the White House or Congress. You know, they passed it, but then it was buried. Mark was appalled by our congressional leaders would bury that apology deep in this appropriations bill. So it had never been read in public. Since it had never been read in public, Mark planned to host a reading of the apology on the steps of the U.S. Capitol in 2012. The apology was initiated by a senator from Kansas and was signed by President Obama. Mark invited the senator and the president to the event, along with invitations to national leaders in the religious, academic, and political communities. Though invited months ahead of time, none of them attended. We offered weak excuses or were not interested. The White House replied that neither the president nor anyone from his staff would attend. But about 150 of Mark's supporters, friends, and citizens came from around the country, paying their own expenses, to hear the reading of the apology. This is another instance of our nation avoiding acknowledging the injustices done to indigenous people.
And when I was in Washington, I went to the Smithsonian Indian Museum and learned there that actually Indians are now headquartering their resources to promote their rights. And I would be just curious why that national Indian, so to speak, association, I guess, overseeing over, I don't know how many thousands of tribes we have in the US and having their own little nations with each of them, have not a chance to have, as they have lawyers and other things, to just go after that anymore. I would say.
Well, they do, but then they go back to the doctrine of discovery.
Yeah, well, I'm saying, but that's exactly where it's sort of going into a dead end. I mean, it's illegal. That's all I'm saying. Given the other rights we have. I mean, I'm just curious that it doesn't evoke more what's the resonance in that? It's an uncomfortable topic, no doubt.
Oh, yeah,
But
yeah,
if
yeah.
it- and if a pope stands up there, a
What's
couple of
the- what's
presidents
the-
stand up there and apologize, I mean, you know, no leaks or something.
Yeah, so what's the solution? To give it back to the Indians? We don't know what country.
No, that's, but,
That won't happen.
yeah, no,
That would be right, but that won't happen.
Right, okay.
I guess, Hal, what I remember about your dad from decades ago was how he expressed his Native American love of nature by being involved in, at that time, the Lutheran camp at Arrowhead.
Yeah.
He always promoted that. So,
Yes, he was not, my mother was the spiritual force in my family.
Sure.
My dad was sort of on the outside, and he finally, I think in the 1950s, he finally joined the church here. And then he became very active. He was on the board for that Lutheran Arrowhead camp in
yeah.
the mountains.
So, I mean, even as I'm talking about the 1980s, or, that he was still standing up at voters' meeting, giving a plug for the camp.
Yeah.
And that's,
He was an advocate. Igor?
Have you returned to the reservation to see how it's changed through the years?
Well, I have not been there since the 70s, but I get the newspaper that's published by the Apache tribe, so I keep track of that, and I vote for the tribal chairman and all that, but I have not been back. My grandson went back. He went back and he was just very touched by all the things he found. He found Navajo Bill's grave at the cemetery, and it was a moving thing for him.
Is the church and your home still there, the church and the home that are in the pictures you sent?
Yeah, it's still there. You can't tell it because they've added on to it, and there's trees all over it, and I have pictures of it, but I can barely pick out the home.
House.
How many people were there when you lived there? And do you have any idea of the population today?
Well, it was just a few thousand on the total reservation, 4,000 or 5,000, I think. Now there are 17,000 Apaches, and many of them off the reservation, like I am.
Where is it in Arizona?
It's in the central eastern part. It's in the White Mountains, and then actually it's, it isn't all desert, what Arizona isn't. There's some beautiful white mountain, it looks like Colorado in places. There's a over 10,000 foot sacred mountain on the reservation.
We're friends of his dad, passed away a long time ago.
what is the structure that was your home that is still there? What is it now? Is it a home?
Yeah, it's a home.
Someone's home?
Yeah, and there are a lot more homes around it now. In fact, there's a paved road in front of it. When we lived there, it was a gravel trail.
Papa, is your dad in this picture with the same quartet?
Yes.
Which one is he?
It's this one here. Yeah. There's a picture of the Lutheran church that was built in 1920, or dedicated in 1922.
Yeah.
Anything more?
Just this, several of us were privileged to see tonight your granddaughter, great-granddaughter, in the LA council, city council chambers.
Yes.
Yeah.
Doing a dance.
Yeah.
That was wonderful. to see.
Here, Meryl. Come up here with me. Yes, this is the little girl that performed at the LA City Council meeting, and I'm so proud of her and love her very much. Marilyn, she's been named for Marilyn.
Boy, what a family.
And, you know, I guess one other thing I know about you with the Doctrine of Discovery is that you've been published in the LA Times, letters to the editor,
Yes.
two or three times. You have commented.
9 times.
Nine
I've had
times.
9 letters in the
Okay,
Times.
9. Okay, I read 3 maybe. I missed 6.
There was one just this last July 4th that you were published in.
Yes, and then there was one just 2 or 3 weeks ago.
Oh, okay.
Can you tell us what you wrote to them?
Well, it's always in response to something that triggers, you know, that's when I know when to write, is when I say, oh, this can be traced back to the Doctrine of Discovery. And I think all the problems we have, all of them, like I said in here, it can all be traced back to the Doctrine of Discovery. But nobody does that. I mean, they stop it along the way and don't go far back enough. Yes.
I'd like to just say thank you so much. Just like the lady mentioned earlier, when I first met you, the first emotion that I felt and my husband felt was God's love, how it just radiates from you. And I also want to just share with you and just say thank you so much for being that conduit to share and to champion the Doctrine of Discovery so that it will continue to just spread throughout the world and we can learn more about it and embody God's love together.
Yeah.
So I want to say thank you for that.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thanks, Hal.
Thank you
Okay.
so much.
And thank you, my family, for all coming out here.
Oh, so you never got them? They came back. Okay.
Al, wait, can I take the microphone?
Oh, I didn't see it. Wave it
I'll turn it off. It's hard to do.